All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a big one, a question that really makes you think about how we view faith and God's role in our lives.
Yeah, definitely a big one.
The question you guys sent in, what qualifies you for God's protection? We're going to be diving into some source material, really unpacking some different perspectives.
And the material you provided, it gets right to the heart of it. It really challenges this idea that God's protection is something we earn. Like we have to reach some level of, I don't know, goodness or perfect love or something like that.
Okay, so the source jumps right in, addressing this idea that's pretty prevalent, I think, in certain teachings, that God's blessings and protection are conditional. Like we got to be perfect in our love and obedience to Him.
Exactly, like loving the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, all that.
Yeah, with everything we got.
Yeah.
And the author of this source really takes issue with this kind of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. If our love for God was the key, wouldn't we constantly be worried about messing up?
Right, like, oh, did I do enough today to be worthy of protection?
Exactly. So the source argues that this kind of teaching can actually, I guess you could say, rob you of the faith to believe God for that protection.
Makes sense. Because let's face it, none of us are perfect. Our love for God, it's not always constant, it fluctuates.
Totally. We're human, right? And the source uses this image of a shaky foundation to describe what happens when we try to base our relationship with God and His protection on our own ever-changing efforts.
So instead of focusing on what we're doing or not doing, this text really highlights God's actions. It reminds us that God sent Jesus not because humanity was almost good enough on its own, but because we just couldn't fulfill those commandments perfectly.
It was like God saying, look, I know you can't do this on your own, so let me love you.
Yeah, it completely shifts the focus. Instead of us striving to reach God, it's about recognizing God reaching down to us.
The source describes it as like the beautiful love story of the gospel. You know, God taking the initiative, sending Jesus to bridge that gap we could never cross ourselves.
And Jesus, He fulfilled the law completely, right? So where does that leave us in terms of God's protection, according to the source?
It brings us to this idea of the new covenant. The text emphasizes that divine protection, God's favor, it's not about our shaky on-again, off-again love for Him.
Right. It's not about earning it.
Exactly. Instead, it's all based on His unwavering love for us. There's this great quote from 1 John 4:10 that the source brings in, and it really sums it up. In this is love, not that we loved God, but that He loved us and sent His Son to be the propitiation for our sins.
Powerful stuff. So it's God's love that's the constant, not ours.
Right. And while the source makes it clear that our love for God isn't unimportant, it's about understanding what the true, dependable foundation is.
The source even quotes Lamentations 3.22 to drive this point home. It says, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases.
You know, that really hits me. It's not about how much we love God in any given moment. It's about recognizing His constant, unfailing love for us.
So when we ask that question, what qualifies you for God's protection? This source suggests it's not about achieving some level of perfection or earning it through good deeds. It's about recognizing and relying on God's grace.
His amazing grace, yeah. That unconditional love for us that's not based on anything we do. It's just there.
And that's a powerful message, right? It shifts the entire focus from what we have to do to who God is.
Completely. And I think for anyone listening, the biggest takeaway from this deep dive is that God's protection, from this perspective, isn't a reward we earn. It's a result of His very nature, His love for us.
And that changes everything.
Yeah.
It's not about constantly trying to be good enough. It's about resting in the fact that God's love is already enough.
And it leaves us with something to really think about. If God's protection is rooted in His unconditional love, not our performance, how does that change how we view our faith? How does it impact our sense of security?
Yeah, what does it actually look like to live each day knowing that we're loved and protected, not because of what we do, but because of who God is? Something to ponder for sure.
Definitely. A lot to unpack there.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive today. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.
See ya!